Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on the first episode of our podcast. We're super excited to be leading this discussion today about intersectionality, what that looks like for each of us, what that means, and where the history of the term even originated from. But before we get into all that fun stuff, we'll take a few seconds to introduce ourselves. So, Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm Jana Amin. I'm a 18-year-old now, Egyptian American activist for social justice, empathy, and inclusion. And I'm super excited to be here. Sophia, do you want to introduce yourself next?
Yeah, sure. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Sophia Bay. I am 20 years old. I'll define myself as an activist as well. I'm really into social justice, food justice, and all of those good things.
Okay, and I'll wrap it up. My name is Miriam Siraj. I am 17 currently, and I guess you could say I'm also an activist. I do activism in my own way, do my own little part. Yeah, pass it off to Jenna.
Yay, awesome. Thank you, everyone. Super excited for this conversation. So before, we get right into it, Sophia, can you help us out by talking about what is intersectionality? Where did the term even originate from? And why is it so important in today's world?
So before I go into the definition, I'm going to go into its origins. So the term intersectionality was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989 in a paper. And the way that she used it was to help explain the oppression of African-American women. And Crenshaw's term is now at the forefront of national conversations about racial justice, identity politics, policing. And over the years, it's really helped to shape legal discussions and also discussions like we're going to have today, hopefully. So it's where it originates from and who it originates from. Its loose definition is the interconnected nature of social categorization, such as race, class, and gender, as they apply to a given individual or group, regarded as creating overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantages. So that was really long, but hopefully as we continue our conversation, we'll be able to break it down and make it more palatable for those who might not have understood the really big definition.
Yeah, that's awesome, Sophia. And I think that actually transitions us perfectly to the next thing I'm curious about, which is, what does intersectionality mean to each of you, and how does it kind of play out in your day-to-day lives? And I can go first here because I think for me, intersectionality, when I first kind of understood and became aware of the term, was almost like this light bulb enlightening moment, right? Because I think for so long I'd struggled to think about how my identities came together, but also clashed, how they compounded oppression, right? I was slightly more oppressed or had to face the oppression because of the differences in who I was and the different layers of my identity. And at the same time, right, I had privileges because of the intersections of other identities. And so I think for me, learning about intersectionality was kind of a very validating moment for me. But I also think it's one that has helped me understand the world around me better, right? Because now I can look at people and understand that they are the product of all these different identities coming together, almost like a puzzle, to create this incredible person, right? Who shows up at each table with a various perspective. But Miriam, I'm curious to hear, what intersectionality means to you.
Well, I feel like I agree with like a lot of what you said. Like I feel like it definitely was like an aha moment for me where I was like, oh, okay, like it's like I don't know, like I feel like the type of person I am is like I compare myself to people a lot, and like I feel like I kind of like ended up, especially got in that rut, like as I got older, and I feel like learning about intersectionality kind of really helped me be like, oh, well, I really can't compare myself to people because like we're all kind of like unique in our own way. And I know how cheesy that sounds, but like I feel like that's kind of like what really kind of like I don't know, this topic really like struck me at my core when I kind of learned that. And like it's interesting too because I feel like sometimes I don't, you know, think about my identity too much. I kind of like, especially for a large portion of my life, I was just out here being. And like feel like after a certain point, like when I did start thinking about my identity, like it was weird because I started realizing like, there's certain parts of me where I'm like, I'm low-key privileged. Like I feel like, being being Sunni, that's like a like, you're privileged in that sense because you're part of the majority of Muslims. But yeah, like I think like it's just such a like full topic that I just enjoy like talking about. Yeah.
Sophia, what about you? I don't know, how has intersectionality played out in your life, and how has it, shaped your identity?
So I'm trying to remember when I was first introduced to the term intersectionality, and I can't really remember. So it was either through my mom and the social activism and social justice work that she does, because she's always introducing me to new terms and new vocabulary, it's really cool, but then you get overwhelmed sometimes. So it's either through her or it was through my sociology class that I took like maybe 2 or 3 years ago. I don't remember, but besides that, like, so what does intersectionality mean to me? How do I relate to it? Well, when I was first introduced to it, to be honest, I was just like, okay, like I kind of similar to what I said earlier when I was doing the definition of the word. I was just like, okay, this just means like intersectionality, like it is what it is. But I didn't really understand it at the time. I was just like, this is just another term that is just going to be overused or whatever. It's just going to be like that new term. But as time went on, I've kind of been able to connect myself to it and allow myself to actually understand and categorize myself like within the term, see myself through the term, period. But what I mean to say is like having to break down my own identity, similar to what Miriam said, it was a little bit uncomfortable. It was different. It's not something that I ever really did because I never stepped out of my shoes to look at myself and look at all of the identities that I have. So that was definitely different for me. But being in the spaces that I'm in now, the spaces that I've put myself in, like being a member of this, the CAIR Youth Advisory Council, being somebody who goes to school, similar to what Miriam said, being a Sunni Muslim, being a woman, being African-American, realizing that all of those identities play a role in who I am and how I come across to people and my interactions with people. That is something that's like really important, and being able to put a word onto how my identities create who I am and my interactions with people as well. I think that's really cool. And it's kind of comforting to be like, okay, like this all makes sense now. Like, why do things happen? Because I'm this, and because I have all of these really great identities and stuff. So yeah.
Sophia, I think I really appreciated that you kind of ended that with the fact that you love all those identities, because I think as a young Muslim American, that's definitely something that I have struggled with personally, but also seen so many people within the Muslim Ummah here in the United States struggle with as well. And rightfully so, right? Because we see in the media, we see in TV shows, all over the place, really, that Muslims and American doesn't necessarily go together. But I think for me, I found also a lot of beauty in the fact that I'm Muslim American, and especially a young Muslim American. First of all, it means I can meet lovely, lovely people like you. But I also think it means that you have this kind of special insight into the world, right? I approach, things with both empathy, using kind of the part of Islam that tells me, to be peaceful and to approach things with a perspective of empathy and kindness. But at the same time, right, I also can kind of code switch and fuse the identities together to be both Muslim and American. So I think I definitely loved how you said that it was something beautiful for you, and it was something, that you've learned to accept. But how has it impacted your life as a young Muslim, this idea of intersectionality? Sophia, I'm curious to hear more about that.
Before I jump into that one, I just wanted to like also like jump in and say like I think something that's also very special about where we all kind of like come from is like we all kind of like I mean like more so like I guess like me and Sophia like we're in a different position right now, but like I think it's just so interesting that like that like I guess Muslim first gen people like will be regular kids. Like I mean, like they're always regular kids, right? But like let's say like for me, the way that I see it, it's like before I wore a hijab, I was just a normal black girl. You know what I mean? Like it's so interesting how like intersectionality kind of becomes more intense in a way once you kind of like get older. And like I guess like even for you, Jenna, like I would imagine like it's kind of weird being in a position where like you're not outwardly Muslim, but like you are Muslim, and like it, you know what I mean? I feel like that's just like the case for like a lot of like kids here, but like I don't know, for me at least, like the way it kind of plays out is like sometimes it's like I'm like I'm of course outwardly Muslim, but like sometimes it's like it's kind of it's just the thing I was just trying to get at was really like the fact that certain identities kind of come out more at times and like they're prioritized more. I don't know. I just thought that was such an interesting concept. Like the fact that like there's just sometimes a transitional period for people and sometimes you're just kind of like in this weird limbo where you're like you are this and you just what I mean? Like I don't know. But yeah, I know it's all random, but yeah, you guys.
No,
you guys
that's
can
actually
go ahead.
super true. And it's something that I think about a lot because to Mariam's point, like I don't wear the hijab. And I think the way that first of all, the way that I'm treated when I'm with, say my grandmother or my aunts who are wearing the hijab is so different than when I'm kind of walking through the world on my own. And that definitely has to do with the fact that I'm not visibly or outwardly Muslim, right? Even though it is a layer of my identity. And I think that that's like something that I've definitely grappled with throughout kind of my life. And then I also think it's fascinating because, right, there's also the intersectionality of the fact that, walking through the street, I look visibly both white passing in some ways. My skin is on the lighter side. And yet you can also tell that I'm either Arab or Hispanic or something like that, right? And so it's, again, this intersectionality of, the way that you're outwardly presented and also the person you are within. And I think within each layer of our identities, we have kind of those juxtapositions too, versus what people see versus, how we feel and how we choose to present ourselves. So I also find that fascinating and it's definitely impacted my life.
No, I think what you just said was so perfect because it literally set up a great transition into what I was going to say. So I was going to talk about, to the question that Jenna asked me, you said, how does intersectionality impact me as a Muslim? It definitely being a Muslim and navigating myself through the Muslim community and such, I see its impact, but I don't really know how I feel about it, or like how it impacts me. So like, I'm gonna give an example. Like when I'm at the mosque, obviously I wear hijab. I'm to people at face value, they see me as just Black. Most Muslims, when no matter what group ethnicity of Muslims I'm in, they usually take me as African. I'm African American. But people will ask me, okay, so like what country are you from? Or do you speak this language? Or are you this, are you this? And I'm just like, no, I'm still a Muslim, but when I say, oh, I'm African American, they'll be like, so when did you convert? And I'm just like, okay, like that's not, like a part of my identity is that I'm an African American Muslim. My roots lead back to the slave trade. And that's like a really rich part of my identity. That's not something that I want to hide or to not like respect. And I think it's very funny that at face value, like we just said, you see me as just another African Muslim from an African country, when it's like, okay, like I am, but I don't know my roots. I'm an African American Muslim, where, my roots are in this country through my enslaved ancestors. And that brings me to my point of back to my sociology class when we were talking about intersectionality. A topic came up. I didn't look it up before the episode, which I should have, but it was a topic of master status, which I believe this is very loose definition, but it's something like the identity that you identify with the most, or that you see yourself as the most. So I kind of, as a African-American Muslim woman, I struggle with like, which identity out of those three do I identify with the most? Like, do I identify with being like African-American the most? Do I identify with being a Muslim the most? Do I identify with being a woman the most? Because it feels like sometimes in order to fit into certain spaces, you have to detach your identities just
Totally.
to fit into certain spaces. So like, I kind of had to grapple with the fact that I can be my whole self with all of my identities. Those three are just the main three that I portray, obviously. But I had to really tell myself, like, no, Sophia, you can be all of your identities all the time. You don't have to hide them for certain spaces or act like you're like, put one of your identities aside. So like when I'm with Muslims and they say, what country are you from? I'm not afraid to be like, oh, I'm African-American. My roots lead back to the slave trade. Or when I'm with a group of people, I don't have to, obviously I can't hide my Islam. I wear hijab and stuff, but I don't have to kind of like, tone down my Muslimness for other people. Like, no, it's hard, but it's okay to be your whole self all of the time. Yeah, so that just that term master status, that's what it's called? Yeah, the master status, I think it related really well to the points that you both had made earlier.
Bro, I like, it's so crazy that you said that, because like I was gonna try to like add on and be like the thought that I was going to say was like I don't know, like, do you guys think it's like important to like focus on your identities, or like pay it too much mind? Like I feel like, as like, I don't know, as like you kind of capture this perfectly when you're kind of talking about like, like you brought up the concept of like a master identity, and like which one should you like, resonate the most with. And I feel like it's just so tough, like kind of feeling like you have to drop a certain identity or whatever. And it's like, and it's so weird too, because like I feel like there's like this weird, I guess I'm still the younger phase, but like I feel like I'm still trying to figure out what it means to be Muslim, what it means to be Black, what it means to be a woman. Like I feel like I'm still figuring that out. So it's kind of weird to like feel like I have to pick one sometimes. What are your guys' like thoughts on that?
I think one of the really fascinating things about intersectionality is that like your identities sort of kind of, back to what Sophia was saying about the master status, become more pronounced in various situations, right? And so when I'm amongst a group of Muslims, I feel like the fact that I'm Egyptian or from Egypt becomes a lot more pronounced because, the baseline is Muslim. Versus if I'm at, my predominantly white school, the baseline is that everyone's white, mostly Christian. So kind of the Muslim becomes the thing that's more pronounced. And I feel like that impacts a lot of the ways in which I go, about my day-to-day lives. I'm even thinking about my experience in the activism space. I think I'm often viewed as a Muslim woman. I feel like those two things are always kind of put together. And those are the two identities that I, truly fight for. It's one of my passions, but also it's one of the things that's more pronounced, even though I don't look visibly Muslim. And I think that it always makes me think, right? How do you ensure that you are still being true to all of your identities, even when, you're forced to, or some are forced to take a back seat or a front seat in different situations? And I don't know, how do you guys deal with that? Like, I don't think I've gotten to the point where I feel totally comfortable navigating some of these spaces where suddenly like I'm looked to as the Muslim, whereas other spaces I'm looked to as the Egyptian, whereas other places I'm looked to as the woman, right? And so I struggle with like making sure that I'm representing and bringing all my identities to the table at every moment.
Well, I guess my idea of it is like, well, is it even up to us? Like which like identity kind of comes forth first? Is it like whatever other people kind of notice first? Or is it like, I don't know, I feel like in a weird way, like the idea that like our identities like have to be, but it's like in our control of like what we should kind of put on the forefront first in different scenarios.
No, I think that's a really good question to like bring into this conversation, because I think, again, it relates back to the master status. Like, you can have a master status in yourself. So you'll be like, okay, I identify most as being a woman. But then when other people see you, your master status to them is the fact that you're a Muslim because you wear hijab. Like, I think it could be like both, where like you have your own and you portray your master status through how you act and how you define yourself and the things that you value. But then also other people have like their own master status of yourself. Does that make sense? Like, they have their own view of you just based off of how they take you in and how they are able to digest who you are, what you look like, what they think you value, etc. But I think it's really interesting because like that can be good, and then it can also be really bad when it comes to like having other people kind of size you up and be like, what are you about, you know?
I think one of the interesting things too is that I hear us coming back to kind of splitting up the intersectionality of our identities into kind of three main categories, right? I think the first being race, the second being religion, and the third being gender. And it sounds like those are the three main categorizations that we see. But there's also, I think, so many too that we don't necessarily present with, or people don't necessarily, can't necessarily see on the surface when they look at you. But I even just think of, we mentioned first, like, what sect you're a part of. I know I'm, an immigrant, and I feel like that's definitely an identity that comes up often. The fact that I'm straight, right? I think all these identities intersect in very interesting ways with the other ones, even if they're not quite as pronounced, even if they don't play that master status role. And it just creates more complexities. I think that's why like analyzing intersectionality is so interesting, because at every point in history, right, there's been someone with intersections of their identity, and that has shaped the way that they respond to decisions, the way that they craft their opinions, the way that they run political campaigns, whatever it might be. And so I think that as young Muslims, like, it's important that we understand intersectionality and know how to analyze the world through an intersectional lens to make sure that we are properly, I think, mobilizing the communities we're a part of, properly serving the people that we care about and the communities we care about, but maybe most of all, properly helping ourselves, right? Just move about the world as people.
I guess the other question that kind of like came up as you were talking was like, I guess in this case, like what you kind of like choose to, I don't know, like resonate with the most. Like not necessarily like, oh, like I choose to show this more, but like more so like, how are you guys navigating what this identity means to you when, like, I guess all you're kind of taught is like what like society's like version of like your identity is.
A really big question, but it's a really, really good question, and it also forces you to really kind of come to terms with and look into each of your identities.
Yeah, I mean, I think also kind of related to that point, I do feel like in a lot of, at just various points in my life, I found that those intersections, like I try to bring the best of my identities to the table, right? And so I think I try to pull from Islam what I truly love and what I hope the rest of the world would see about it, right? To kind of counteract that terrorist narrative. And then from, being a feminist, I try to pull the best of that and bring it to the table. And then I think that goes true, I think, or I try to make it come true for every single one of my identities. But I also think the same way that I try to bring the best to the table, I think a lot of people can assume the worst, right? Once they recognize one of the identities in you. And I think that that's kind of where some of the tension and conflict in our world stems from. And definitely in my own life, I found that, the moments where I feel most insecure is when people use the intersections of my identity to kind of almost punch me when I'm down, right? Because I think that's when you feel most vulnerable, when people are using the intersection of our identities against you. And I think that that's something we see a lot personally in our world. I think of Black women, right? I think so often people weaponize both the fact that they're Black, but also the fact that they're women. And then suddenly, I think that's when you have like these really complex systemic systems of oppression, right? That are unfortunately, I think, devastating our world in so many ways. And I feel like the best way to fight against them, for me personally, has been like through storytelling, through bringing out the intersections of my identity. But I don't know if you all have different tools of how you kind of have done that, because it's hard, like it's really hard. And I think it's when you're most vulnerable, right? Because you're bringing together those identities, and we want to see that intersection as a place of love, but sometimes it can be a place of tension and conflict and hurt.
I think the simple answer for me is I don't know. I don't know how I'm doing that. Like, real talk, I'm kind of just taking it day by day, like figuring out, trying to. I mean, I feel like that's kind of what we're all doing here. Like in every scenario that we're in, we're kind of just trying to do our best with what we have, um, which I think is like really like. I mean, that's I don't know. That's like pretty much all we can do. I guess the other thing that kind of came to mind is like, how do you guys think like maybe like how you deal with like I guess identity, intersectionality in these like situations? Like, how do you guys think it plays a part in your confidence?
Again, both of y'all with the great questions. I'd have to say when it comes to like, I'm just gonna use again the basic 3 identities that I most outwardly identify with, being a Muslim, being African American, and being a woman. Similar to what Jenna had said, like there's ways that each of those identities, they're all minority identities. African American, being Muslim, being a woman, you know, so it's really like you can be down bad at times. But a way that I feel like I have really uplifted myself, and touching on Miriam's question, really upped my confidence, is by going through like each of those identities, being a Muslim. So like what is my role, like what is my benefit like in Islam, like what can I be like, oh yeah, like this is a really great trait of women in Islam, this is a really great trait of Africans in Islam, and like, you know, people of color in Islam, like this is like, these are things that I can relate to and I can hold close to my identity to help me. And then going on to being a woman, like what, like we can look into the feminist movement, like what role did Muslims play in the feminist movement? What role did African Americans play in the feminist movement? So like relating all 3 of my identities into each other and intertwining them into each other, what just makes you more stronger, and it makes you more firm in who you are and able to understand yourself more. I hope that made sense. But even when you look at like Islam, you can really relate any of your identity to Islam, which is like what we should be able to do. Like that one gives you stronger faith, and it gives you stronger like self-worth. Like, you know your self-worth, you know who you are as a person. Like just through looking at yourself through the eyes of Islam, you're able to strengthen yourself as a person as a whole through all of your identities, like your gender identity, your like how you identify racially or ethnically. Like you're able to strengthen each aspect of yourself just looking at it through Islam. So really like going through each and every one of your identities and like kind of just tying them together and relating them to each other, in order to boost your confidence and become more firm in who you are as a person. That allows for less of a space for there to be like not so much confidence in yourself.
Sophia, I was snapping to everything you said. I couldn't agree more. I mean, the phrase kind of that I thought of while you were speaking is the fact that, you know, their weapons are our superpowers. And I think that's especially true here. I think for me, kind of using the intersections of my identity to fuel my strength, to build up my confidence, but also to make me realize that like I have a unique perspective, I have unique experiences, and I have unique expertise that I can share with this world because of the intersections of my identity. And that means no one on this earth can give the same kind of 2 cents that I can, right? And I think that that gives you a unique opportunity, I think, to help others, to empower people, to connect with people, to empathize, etc. And I know, like, I think of almost every single one of my identities, right? But the fact that I'm, you know, an immigrant in America means that I can connect with so many other immigrants and refugees from around the world. That the fact that I'm Egyptian American, right, means that I can understand conflict in the Middle East through a completely different perspective than someone who's grown up their entire life in the US. The fact that I'm non-hijabi and Muslim means that I can speak up for my hijabi sisters, right, but also advocate for representation in the Muslim community of all of women who look, come in all different forms. And so I think that realizing that you, and don't even get me started on being a young person, right, with a digital expertise, et cetera. But my point is that I think every single one of us has just so much that they bring to the table because of the intersections of our identities, that it's almost, I think, foolish to let people weaponize that against you. Because at the very end of the day, it is a superpower and it is something that you should show up proud. And I think with a huge smile on your face, right? Because I think that that's what makes you invincible and ensures that you can connect with other people and make your way through this world with friends and allies.
This discussion has been like so amazing, and it's just been so perfect. And there are so many more things about intersectionality that we weren't even able to touch on, like in this conversation alone. But I think like it was good that we touched on the things that we found most important to us, and like that we could all relate to, like really like on a really dope, like really nice, calm level. So I think that's really good. But this is a conversation that could go on for like hours on end. And I think we did like a pretty good job kind of bringing it down a little bit and like making it more understandable, especially because this is just an introduction to intersectionality and what it means to us.
As we're closing, actually, I wonder if everyone can share maybe like one or two resources that are helpful to learn more about intersectionality, to understand your intersectionality further, and to keep talking about intersectionality. I know we'd be up to talk to you for sure. But if any tips about talking about intersectionality with your family too, might be an interesting way to leave us all off.
Well, I guess I don't necessarily have like a link or something, but I think what I would say, I feel like it's really important to just kind of have an open mind. I feel like a lot of times like we kind of almost have such deep-rooted ideas, and like we can get a little defensive, and like I just feel like it's important to be open-minded when entering conversations like this, or just entering activism, period. Like I just feel like it's very important to kind of just be like, okay, like maybe my perspective isn't the right perspective, or like, just I don't know, opening up in that way. And then I guess the other thing too is just kind of like just doing what makes the most sense to you. Like I think like it's, I don't know, I think it's important to just kind of like do like follow your voice versus like the voice of others. It's like I feel like it like in that way you can kind of be, or I guess this is a bit of a tangent, but like I don't know, like I just feel like it's really important to just listen to your own voice.
I'd have to say, first of all, like going right back to the first point that I made when I was talking about the origins of intersectionality, doing research. Research is very important, but doing your own research is also really important because people digest things differently. So like reading up on things, reading books, reading articles, learning, continuous knowledge, all of that is like my advice for every single thing. But definitely when it comes to intersectionality specifically, do more research on Kimberly Crenshaw, who was like the creator of like this term intersectionality and how it was used, and also like reading the origins of it, you can relate it to yourself. And another thing, lastly, that I'll leave you all with is, I know people have like problems with their identity, not knowing who they are or how they fit into certain societies and etc. But similarly, like we all said throughout today's discussion, really being able to break down your identities, one, that is a skill in and of itself. Like all of the identities that you hold, it's more than just three. It's more than just the ones that people see at face value. There's a lot. Like your ranking in family, being the first daughter, being first generation, being a Muslim, being a woman, being this, like there's so many. The list should be like 50. Breaking those down and really like seeing for yourself who you are, and also how they relate, and like being able to strengthen those. Like it actually takes work to strengthen your identities in yourself. And once you do that, especially like when it comes to like having like doubts in Islam and doubts about yourself as a person, once you do that and you work on strengthening those things, your identities, how you feel, like it'll make things much easier for yourself, and you'll know yourself better as a person, and you'll be able to navigate this world through all of your identities much better as a person when you're able to fix yourself first, like, you know, constructive criticism on yourself, and then go out into the world and be a better person and become an activist or whatever you want to be. Like, that is the first step, is like self-help.
Thank you, Sophia, and thank you, Mariam, for those insights. This has been an incredible, incredible conversation. My mind personally is reeling, and I know we could talk for hours, and I know hopefully you all could listen for hours as well. But hopefully you've learned a lot from today's discussion. There is so much intersectionality, some of which we only have just started to kind of scratch the surface of today, but we really encourage you to go out there, do your research, listen to, you know, keep an eye out for intersectionality, reflect on your own intersectionality and the intersectionalities of your identity, and have conversations around intersectionality like this one. I know for one that we will be very excited to listen to more episodes and talk about intersectionality in some of those episodes. But without further ado, thank you all so much for joining us.
Like
Oh my God.
Welcome.